All right, good morning, everyone. We're going over Lab 8, Gathering and Understanding Weather Data. For this past couple of labs, we were going over some water quality parameters. Now we're going over some weather parameters and how do they relate to each other. So today, we are going to discuss weather parameters, explore the relationships between them, collect weather data using Weather Underground and online applications. So it's basically this website online where we can look at all these different parameters and we're going to compare them. And then we're going to create an Excel graph analyzing USF weather data and also go over like how do you collect weather data and like, yeah, all the data that was collected before. We're just going to make one Excel graph. And we're going to watch a video experiment, cloud in a beaker. How would you make a cloud and what are the different parts that go into that? So the objectives today is to measure various weather parameters, including wind direction in degrees, wind velocity in meters per second. Sometimes it's given to us in miles per hour, but it's really quick and super easy to convert them if you just have your value, put it into Google, it'll do the conversion for you. We are going to look at air temperature in degrees C, sometimes given to us in degrees Fahrenheit, but that's also okay because it's super easy to just make that the unit conversion from that too. Relative humidity in percent and dew point temperature in degrees C. So we are going to explore the various relationships between these parameters and understand what goes into making a cloud at the very end of today. The deliverables. At the end of today, you're going to upload responses to the Lab 8 datasheet that is on the Lab 8 Canvas page. It's this Word doc with like 2 or 3 pages of a couple of questions. And you're going to upload an Excel sheet with one Excel graph where we're going to make it together. It has a double y-axis of temperature and humidity over time. As a note, there's no lab next week because next week is the semester check-in. So it's basically a time if you have any late work that you wanted to catch up on and just turn in, or if you had any questions, you can reach out to me about that, about your grade or anything like that. So we're not meeting next week, but we're meeting in 2 weeks. So the week of April 27th. Okay. Well, starting off, why should we care about air and weather or climate? There is an ozone hole in Antarctica, and as temperatures are rising, as global warming continues to happen, our land ice is melting. And even though it is our largest freshwater compartment, and it does mean that the amount of water available to us is we're going to have more water available to us, but this also means that sea level rise is going to happen, and sea level rise has a lot of different impacts. One of them could be more frequent and extreme storms, as different storm events, they exacerbate over time and they have an effect on coastal communities and also on flood events too. So where you could see increased drought, increased wildfires, more natural hazards, and also in greater intensity too. And as the environment and as habitats are changing, we could see species extinctions because if they don't have the habitat that they're used to, and as their climate is changing, they don't really have a place to live anymore. So these are a couple of the many reasons about why we should care about air and weather or climate. But now if we're going to go specifically into what is in the air that we breathe. So it's mostly nitrogen and oxygen. So there's around 78% nitrogen in the air, around 21% oxygen, but there's also very minute traces of water vapor and other gases. And if we are going to go into water, water exists in 3 states: solid, liquid, or gaseous state. So the switch from liquid to gas state is evaporation, from water vapor or from gas to liquid is condensation, and from solid to gas, it doesn't really happen all that frequently, but this is sublimation. And these are some examples of the solid state. Water is snow, liquid is we can see through rain, and then the gaseous state of water is water vapor. But if we're going to look more specifically into the 2 phases that do happen more frequently, like evaporation and condensation. Evaporation occurs when water is plentiful, so over oceans, large water bodies, even transpiring vegetation. So the spores on top of plants, they open up when when the temperature gets warmer, the spores open up, and that's when like there's the evaporation of that water from inside that can happen. And now moving on to condensation, this occurs where the relative humidity exceeds 100% saturation, which occurs when evaporation is rapid or where the air is cooled. So relative humidity goes past 100%. Last lab, we talked about what does it mean to be at saturation, under, or supersaturated. So when your air temperature is supersaturated, that's when condensation can start to happen. This is a demo video of specifically what would it look like as air temperature warms up or cools down, and what does that mean for relative humidity? So let me just play that for you all.
Maggie, we can't hear anything.
Can you guys not hear? Okay, shoot. Let me try this again. Okay, all right, let me try this again.
All right, in this demonstration, we're going to demonstrate using these beakers.
Again, I can't hear it.
I think it's because I just need to share my computer.
All right, in this demonstration, we're going to demonstrate using these beakers and some water concepts of relative humidity. Now remember, the relative humidity is the amount of water vapor, individual water molecules, in a given parcel of air relative to the number of water molecules that could be in that particular parcel of air. And it turns out that the relative humidity really depends on the temperature. Now it's important to think of air a little bit differently than maybe you usually do. Air consists primarily of nitrogen, 78% nitrogen molecules, another 21% oxygen, that's 99%. The other 1% is just a whole bunch of other stuff we're not going to worry about. But it's also important to remember that those molecules of air are not really interacting with each other. And that means that there's something else in the air too. That means there's space in the air. There's room between those nitrogen and oxygen molecules. And we can put another molecule into that space. And the molecule that we're interested in is water. So think of relative humidity in a sense of how many water molecules we're putting in the spaces between the air molecules, the nitrogen and the oxygen. There's so many spaces in a given volume of air. If they're all filled with water molecules, then we say the air is saturated and the relative humidity is 100%. If there isn't any water molecules in it, then we would say the relative humidity was 0 and all the spaces are empty. But that very, very rarely ever happens in nature. So here I've got 5 beakers. And let's say that these beakers represent a particular volume of air. And let's say the center beaker here represents a volume of air at a particular temperature. And you can see it's about half full of water. If the entire beaker represents all of the space available to put water, it's about half full. So we'd say the relative humidity in this beaker is 50%, because 50% of the spaces have water in it. But what happens as we warm this air up? As air is heated, the molecules begin moving faster. As they move faster, they spread further apart and the volume increases. That basically means we're making more space. And so if we warm it up a little bit, now the air has this volume. It means it's got more space. And the water is not taking up as much of the available space. See, this is not quite half full. The level is lower in that beaker. If we warm it up even more, say to this size, same amount of water vapor, but now we're making even more space, and you can see that it only fills it up a little ways. Certainly doesn't fill it up halfway. But what happens if we go the other way? So, well, when you warm air up, space increases, the relative humidity goes down. Temperature goes up, humidity goes down, unless there's a source of water vapor to put into it. Okay, what happens as we cool this down? Volume is going to decrease, the amount of space is going to decrease, and so now that number of water molecules is taking up more of the volume. Let's cool it down even more. Now we're back where we started at about 50% relative humidity. But what happens if we cool it down even more? Oh, just about full. Now we're almost at 100%. Almost all the spaces are filled with air. What happens if we cool it down even more? And this point where the relative humidity, this temperatures, we're cooling the temperature down. When we reach that point where all the space is gone and the relative humidity is 100%, that temperature is called the dew point. This beaker is completely full. We continue to cool it down, what's it going to do? Yep, it's going to rain. So, when relatively warm air that has a lot of space in it, when it's around a body of water like an ocean, or in the case of where we live here in the state of Tennessee, we get ours primarily from the Gulf of Mexico. That water is going to evaporate into that warm air, taking advantage of all the space that's available. And then as that warm air rises, because it's less dense, begins to expand, begins to cool off. As that air cools, the humidity is going to go up. When it reaches the temperature where the relative humidity is 100%, that's the dew point, then condensation can begin to occur. And if the conditions are right, clouds will form, and as air continues to cool, as the clouds form and thicken, eventually precipitation happens.
All right, so, okay. Yeah, so I think that was a good visual example of what it would look like as air temperature as it gets warmer, as it cools down. What does that mean for relative humidity? And I think it just depends on the amount, or like the volume of space that's available to it. So as air gets warmer, the amount of space that air can take up, or like that water can take up, there's just more space, so relative humidity would go down, and the opposite would happen when air is cooled. And now, if we're going to go a little bit more in depth on the different definitions, relative humidity is the percentage of water vapor that exists in a gaseous mixture of air and water vapor. So if we're thinking back to that past slide in that video where we had our beaker, if we wanted to look at that beaker in that point in time and pretend that our liquid water was our gaseous water, that percentage of water and gaseous mixture of air, that would be our relative humidity in percent. Dew point is the temperature at which the given sample of air will have a relative humidity of 100%, so saturation temperature, so where water takes up exactly 100% of the space that the air allows it to. And then the relationship between both is that relative humidity depends on air temperature. So if you have low air temperatures, if it's cooler, if it's colder, you'll have higher relative humidity because there's not as much space for it to take up. In higher temperatures, in warmer air, there's a lower relative humidity because in higher temperatures, warmer air, more volume of space, therefore like that same amount of water vapor would just have more space for it to take up, but it would take up less space in general. So now if we're going to go over saturation point of air as it increases with temperature, one example that we can see on pretty normally is like what happens to a glass of cold iced tea on a hot day. So we see that ice is going to melt, there's going to be evaporation and also condensation on the sides. So warmer air can hold more moisture than cooler air because as warmer air, as our temperature increases, there's more space for our air to exist in. And we can see that as saturation point, as our temperature increases, as our air gets warmer, our saturation point is going to increase, meaning that we can hold more moisture like as our temperature increases. So now we can move on to condensation and clouds. So clouds are the visible products of condensation within the atmosphere, and they exist, they're moisture, but they also need something to condense around, so a nucleus. And these small particles for our moisture to condense around is called cloud condensation nuclei, or CCN. So one way through geoengineering that we can force condensation to happen and force rain to happen is through cloud seeding, where you introduce CCNs into the atmosphere and eventually it'll produce rain. So if we're going to look at this picture, we have silver iodine or dry ice being introduced. And if we zoom in, this is what it looks like. So already there's our moisture in the air, our gaseous H2O. We introduce this chemical, silver iodine, dry ice, whatever our CCN is. Our moisture or our gaseous H2O is going to condense around this nucleus, and it's going to create eventually this liquid H2O and our clouds and produce rain. So CCN, cloud condensation nuclei, they come in many forms. It could be smoke from chimneys, forest fires, volcanic activity, so from ash or sulfate aerosols, that's super small particles, soil stirred up by wind, because we know that clay is a super small particle and there's a lot of different types of particles or soil. Sea spray, even sea spray, that small spray of hypersaline solution, and pollen. So cloud condensation nuclei can come in many forms, and really it's just small particles which moisture or cloud droplets can coalesce or condense around. So if we're going to zoom in to see what our cloud particles would look like, so our typical raindrop is around 2 millimeters. Our cloud droplets, a typical cloud droplet is 0.02 millimeters. A large cloud droplet is 0.05 millimeters. And our cloud condensation nucleus or whatever CCN would be around even smaller than that. So 0.0002 millimeters. These super small CCNs is what moisture gathers around to condense and make large cloud droplets, typical cloud droplets, which would then come together to make rain eventually. So now if we're thinking about coastal fog in San Francisco, because we know that fog is a form of cloud, if we were going to zoom in and look at specifically San Francisco, we have our cold California current, our cold water coming in, and we have our hot air that rises from the middle of our land in California, and warm Pacific air blowing in to mix in and condense around our sea spray, our CCN. A couple slides ago, we said that sea spray could be one form of cloud condensation nucleus, and this is for San Francisco. Sea spray is the CCN that all of these different factors condense around to make our fog. This is an example of advection and condensation, where warm, moist air from the Pacific is blowing in over cooler waters from the California current, and all of this moisture condenses around our sea spray to make our fog. Another weather parameter is cardinal directions and degrees. So we have northeast, southwest, north being 0 degrees, east being 90 degrees, south 180, and west 270. And in between, it follows this pattern. So if we're going to look at weather parameters, we look at the direction of wind in cardinal degrees, and this is how we can write them with these numbers. So now if we were to collect weather meters or weather data and all these different parameters, we can do this through the Kestrel weather meter. And this is a setup of how you would put together a kestrel weather meter. The volume on it is already really low, but you can just watch as Darren, our lab manager, goes through and puts it together and shows you how to use it. So I will just play that for you all right now. The volume is already, it's just low, so yeah.
Hello, this is a brief introduction to the Kestrel 5500 weather meter. This portable weather meter allows us to take weather readings of parameters that would normally be covered by a weather station that is in place. The parameters covered by this meter include the date, time, the direction, as it is equipped with an internal magnetic compass, wind speed, as well as other functions of wind speed, temperature, wind chill, humidity, the heat index, dew point, the wet bulb temperature, pressure, barometric pressure, altitude, and also provides summary screens of all of that data. In order to function properly in the field, this weather meter is also accompanied by a portable weather vane kit. This kit comes in 5 parts, as seen here, and allows us to build a weather vane. This vane, once assembled, rotates freely around an axis and also holds the weather meter. This can be mounted upon a monopod or a tripod and left in the field to take measurements at an elevation higher than ground level so that we can get accurate readings of wind speed. You can see that it moves freely upon the rotating axis.
Okay, great. So that was how to put together the Kestrel weather meter and how we can look at the different parameters. On this next video, it shows you how you could use the Kestrel weather meter in the field. So in this example, we are in the field or in the grassy area in front of in the hilltop UCSF or USF, that little field right in front of the church and in front of the library. So this is Darren again showing us how we could use it. The volume on this one is a lot better too.
Hello everyone. Today we are going to be looking at a field application for the Kestrel 5500 weather meter. Now we understand how to assemble the weather kit and the vane, and now we can see that it is properly put together and placed on a tripod in the middle of an open field. It's important that we have our setup in the middle of an open space so that we avoid as much interference as possible from nearby buildings or large trees. You can see that we are substantial distance from both the nearest building and the nearest tree. This prevents any obstructions and changes that we can see occurring in the wind speed and direction because of our obstacles. Here you can see that as the wind blows, the propeller on our meter spins and it readjusts itself to face the direction that the wind is coming from. When we are ready to take our readings, we want to make sure that we're about 2 feet or so back from the meter so that we don't interfere with the readings of the wind's velocity or the direction. Each time we want to change the parameter that we are measuring, we will just press the up and down arrows and then, of course, step back and give it a little bit of time to re-equilibrate itself so that we are making sure we're taking proper measurements. Here we have our Kestrel set to take time and date, wind direction, wind speed in meters per second, temperature in degrees Celsius, relative humidity, and our dew point temperature. We also have options to take pressure readings as well as altitude readings.
Okay, great. So that was how we can use the Kestrel weather meter. But now if we, so we are going to go and use the W Underground website and collect our own weather data. So the Kestrel weather meter is one way that you can collect weather parameters. And then I'm also going to go over an Excel walkthrough of how to make our double y-axis graph using USF data. But first, if we're going to use the W Underground website, you can find that on the Canvas page for Lab 8. So if we go to the Canvas page, on the main Canvas page, we have our background information and handout and the pre-lab quiz. And right underneath that, we have our Lab 8 assignment data sheet and Word document. I'm going to open that up to show you what we are going to be looking at, what we're going to try to be filling out. So you're going to download this and then fill in this first table where we have our different parameters. We have time, what time is it, wind direction in degrees, wind velocity in meters per second, air temperature in degrees C, relative humidity in percent, dew point temperature in degrees C, and altitude. Actually, let me share my whole screen. Okay, so from here, right underneath this link in the Canvas page is the W Underground website. And when you click on that, it would take you to this new website here. Let me put these screens side by side so we can see the parameters that we are trying to turn or trying to fill in into our Word doc. One moment. Okay, so let me zoom in here. Okay, so on the W Underground website, we can, in the very first page, the main page, we can search locations and we're gonna type in San Francisco, California. And on the drop-down list, you can select this very first option for San Francisco. It's going to give us a random weather station in San Francisco, but when this page is done loading, we can see that there is these basic information of elevation for altitude, our weather station name, and also there's this map view of what our what San Francisco would look like. It seems to be taking, okay, so once it's done loading, it'll look like this. And if we wanted to look at the different weather stations that are here, we can click into Wonder Map right underneath this map view. And it's going to load. And we can zoom in to San Francisco. Sorry guys, that's my dog in the back, but okay. And right now we don't have any layers on, so we can't see our weather station, but under layers, under sensor network, we wanna select weather stations. And it still wouldn't really pop up any of the weather stations, so you can select one of these weather parameters, so temperature and wind. And once we select that, we can zoom in and see that there are a lot of different weather stations around San Francisco. I can go over this very first column with you, And then the second column, that's what you're going to fill in on your own. But say if we wanted to fill in that first column, I'll just select the weather station closest to USF. So Inner Richmond, the station ID is KCA SANFR 1685. And to go into a separate page for this weather station, I'll just click on the station ID link. So say if we wanted to start filling out this first column, we would put in our time for our first parameter. So it is now 9:02 for you all or for California. The wind directions in degrees is going to be this main compass in this box in the first main page. So remember our cardinal degrees is 0, 90, 180. So here it's around a little bit before 180. So we can say it's around 170 and we can put that in for this box. Our wind velocity is in meters per second. And if we scroll down, that's going to be under gust. And it looks like it's 0.0 by 0.0 kilometers per hour. So if there was a number other than 0, we can convert this by just copying this number, going into Google, and then typing 2 meters per second. But since it's 0, we can say it's 0 meters per second for our wind velocity. Our air temperature is in degrees C, and it's this main number here. So if your air temperature isn't in degrees C, you can change it to, if it's in Fahrenheit, if you scroll all the way up to the top, in the top right corner, you can click on this button and change it from Fahrenheit to Celsius here. And then that should change all of the Fahrenheit numbers to Celsius on your page. But yeah, our air temperature right now is 14.1 degrees C. Relative humidity in percent, that is, if we scroll down in this main box, it's going to be 70%. Our dew point temperature in degrees C, if we also see right underneath that main relative, or yeah, our dew point temperature is 8.7 degrees C. And our altitude, we can find if we scroll up, it's right above our station name and it's an elevation. So our altitude is 63 meters. So
what was the relative humidity again?
Relative humidity, that is, if you look at this main box, it's right underneath pressure. So it's 70% here.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, no problem.
Where did you find the wind direction?
Wind direction, it's this compass here, but
Okay.
yeah, it's given to us in these letters, but we're just going to convert it to cardinal degrees. So we would say 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180. We would say it's like around 170.
Okay.
Awesome. So that's what you can fill out for this very first column. But for the second column, you can choose any other station in San Francisco and fill in all of the parameters for that. I can give 5 minutes for you all to do that, but I'll answer any questions if you have them.
Where did you find the wind velocity again?
Wind velocity, that is, it's wind and gust. So right now, yeah, it's in kilometers per hour, so we don't have to convert it to meters per second because it's 0 to whatever is 0. But if you need to convert it, you would just copy, you go into Google and you can just paste and say 2 meters per second. And it would do the conversion for you if you just look that up. But
but it's going to be 0 either way, right? Because
it's going to be 0 either way. Yeah. Okay.
Where we found altitude?
I'm sorry?
Altitude.
Altitude. So if you scroll up right above your weather station, your station name is elevation. And right now it's in 63 meters for this weather station. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. I will check in with you all in maybe the next 3 minutes then at 6:10 to see how you're doing. Okay.
Hey, Maggie,
Yeah.
where did you find the altitude again? Would it be where it says pressure? You're muted.
Okay. It's right above station name. So
Oh, I see it. Perfect. Thank you.
yeah, of course. No
63
problem.
meters.
Yes.
I can't remember how to get to that page. Are we still on the Wonder Map?
Yeah, we're still on Wonder Map. To get to I guess this map view, is that what you're trying to like to select a different weather station?
Yeah, how do you select the weather station? Because right now I'm just looking at a big map.
Right. So if we here, let me go into the weather station map. So if you're here and if all of the weather stations, when they pop up, you just click on whatever station you want to look at. And under station ID, you can click on this link to take you to that new station.
Those little green dots aren't showing up for me.
Okay, yeah, so under layers, if you select weather station and any of the weather parameters, I think then they should show up. So if our weather stations weren't selected, I think it would just look like this. We select that, select any of the parameters, temperature, wind, dew point, humidity. We're just gonna wait for my computer to load a little bit and it should pop up soon.
I see it now. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course, no problem. Maybe I'll give you another 5 minutes then for your second station and I'll check you all then.
Oh, so that other box is for another station to look at?
Yeah.
Okay, so we just pick any other one in San Francisco or where
Yeah.
we are located?
Any other one in San Francisco, so then at least
Okay.
then you can, yeah, compare to something within the same area.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Should we mark the station, the other one that we're choosing?
Yeah, so sorry, here, let me just show you all how to do.
Let me go mark the other one then too.
Yeah. So if we were looking at our Lab 8 datasheet, one moment. So in your doc, you would just write down the station name in this box here.
Yeah, sorry, one sec. Okay.
Yeah.
And then for the first one, you know which one it is, right? Since we're all doing the same one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this very
Sounds
first
good.
one I know. Yeah.
Okay.
I did one that was kind of a little outside of San Francisco. Were we supposed to do just in San Francisco? Because I did it in Cupertino.
Okay. I think it's fine. I think like I think it's fine. I think it's fine. I think later on for question 1, you'll just have to say for these different parameters that my location, all of these weather parameters, they're like different because I'm in this completely different location. And yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, no problem.
So again, with that cardinal thing, you kind of read it as like a 360-degree thing.
Yeah.
Okay. One more question, Maggie.
Sure.
For our wind and gusts, when we actually have some numbers, one is 8.7, one's 11.1. Like I assume one's wind and one's gust. Which one do you want to us to use? The wind?
Yeah, use wind.
Okay.
Okay. Relative humidity for the station I chose by the beach is higher than the other one, but the actual temperature is lower than the general SF1. So I don't really understand why the humidity would be higher. Right. Okay. Right. So that actually ties in. Somebody had a question about why is the temperature in one station lower? So why is it colder? But why is the relative humidity higher? So that's because as relative humidity is very temperature dependent. So the warmer your area is, the more the more space your water vapor or your gaseous mixture they can take up. So if we're thinking back to that video that we saw of that walkthrough, that very first one where the professor was pouring in water from a big beaker and continuously smaller beakers, as your air heats up, there's more space for your water to exist in. So the warmer the temperature of your air, the percentage or relative humidity would go down. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. How is everyone with filling in that second column? Okay,
Good.
awesome.
I chose one. I chose one at Ocean Beach, and it was like the wind was changing all the time, and it's pretty cool.
Where do you find
Yeah,
that again?
yeah. Altitude, it's right above station ID. It's going to say elevation and whatever number in meters. So let me share that. So if we were to look at W underground, this would be where the elevation is, right above the station name. Okay, so now that we have our table figured out and we can basically answer that first page from question number 1, we are now going to look at USF data and make our one Excel graph. So if we were to go back to our Canvas page, our Lab 8 Canvas page, so right underneath the wunderground.com website link, there's a download Microsoft Excel file containing past weather data from USF, and you will click this little black arrow button to download that. And when you open it up, it's going to look like this. So in 2010, for 5 days straight, 5 days straight, every single second, these different weather parameters were collected over these 5 days. So we have air temperature, relative humidity, barometric pressure, evapotranspiration in millimeters, year-to-date rain, solar, wind speed, and wind direction. What we're really trying to look at is just these two first parameters, air temperature and relative humidity. So we are going to, we're going to make, this is how we can make our Excel graph, is by first selecting these 3 columns. You can click on the letters at the top of the column and it would select all of the cells underneath it. And we're going to go to our toolbar right next to the Home tab, the Insert tab. And in the middle of our toolbar here, we can click on XY scatter. And that very first option with no lines is our scatter plot. And we can just select this.
Can you show these again?
Yes, of course. So let me just delete that. So if we have our all of our data like this, we're just going to first select these 3 columns. So column ABC. And right next to the Home tab, we're going to select the Insert tab in the top left. In the middle of our toolbar, we have all these different options to make different graphs. So, but this button at the bottom, our XY scatter, we'll just select that. And this very first option for scatter plot, the one without the lines, just the scatter, we can select this option.
Okay.
Did anybody want me to go over that again? Okay, I'm going to move it over to this side of our Excel sheet where it says Insert Graph here in that big yellow box, and I'll make my graph a little bit bigger. So from here, we have our primary vertical axis, we have our dates at the bottom, but we want to also have a secondary axis so we know what like our data is for the second axis at the bottom here. So our red is relative humidity, and that's our primary vertical axis, but we also have our air temperature in blue at the bottom. So we want to add in the y-axis on the right here. How we can do that is just click on any point in the blue line at the bottom, and you'll select your air temperature. We're going to right click, and when our drop-down menu shows up, we're going to go all the way at the bottom and select Format Data Series. And when we click on Format Data Series, this window is going to pop up on the side. And right now we have our primary axis, which is the axis on the left side of our graph, but we also want a secondary axis. So we can select secondary axis. And it'll change our graph to look something like this. And we have now our air temperature is aligned, and we have our secondary axis showing up on the side. So after this, it's just making our graph clearer. And so our viewer, whoever's looking at this, they know exactly what they're looking at. So say if we wanted to change, right now it's not a problem now that we made our graph a little bit bigger, but before our dates were super close together and clustered. Right now it's still a little clustered, but we can make it clearer by selecting and just changing the angles to our dates. And if we select these dates at the bottom, and if we right click, or if, once you select it, if your window's already open, format axis should pop up, but if it doesn't show up for you, you can select it, right click, and on this drop down menu, all the way at the bottom of these options, you can select format axes. And then when you select that, this window should pop up if it's not already open.
Sorry,
Right,
Maggie.
yes.
After you picked the air temperature and you did the right click to do the format data series, what did you click after that to make it clustered?
Yeah, I'm a little lost too.
Okay. Yeah, let me try that again. So I selected my air temperature and I right clicked and I selected format data series. Okay. In this new window, do you see series options? Primary axis, secondary axis?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, select secondary axis.
Okay. Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, no problem. Okay. Great. So now, yeah, so now onto the dates at the bottom. If we wanted to just change it and maybe just angle it so it's not so clustered, we can select it. And again, if your format axes window doesn't pop up, you can, after you selected your dates at the bottom, you can right click, and given all of these options, you can select format axes, this option at the very end. And if this doesn't show up then, or if format axes, this window didn't show up before, it should show up now. And a lot of different options for how you can adjust your graph. Right now, it's just cleaning up our graph, and we have our minimum, maximum bound, major, minor units. But on this very next tab, we are in format axes. If we click on this next tab where it looks like a square with 4 arrows in it, we can change the alignment of our dates. Right now it's a vertical alignment and the text direction is horizontal, but we can just shift it to a custom angle so it's not so clustered and close to each other. So say we can just type in 45 degrees and hit enter, and it should change the angle of our dates on our plot or our graph. Did anyone want me to go over that again? Okay, so from here, now we can just add in our axes titles and change our chart title names. So we have our chart selected, and if we go on our toolbar, all the way at the end, right before format at the end, we have chart design. If we select that, add chart element is this option on the left. And if we hover over axes titles, we can add in our primary horizontal, primary vertical, and secondary vertical. First, I guess we can add in our primary horizontal for our dates. So our x-axis title. And when that pops up on our chart, we can just change that to date. Now we have that, we can add in our vertical axis titles. We can go back under chart element, hover over axes titles. We just added in our primary horizontal. Now we can select primary vertical or secondary vertical, but if we selected primary vertical, that's going to give us our axis title on the left side of our Excel graph. And we can change that to relative humidity. Make sure to put in your units in percent. Excuse me. And now we can put in our secondary axis title. So go back under Add Chart Element on the top left. Hover over Axes Titles. We have our primary horizontal. We just added our primary vertical. Secondary vertical is this last option on the end. And when that shows up on our graph, we can change that to air temperature in degrees C. So we have all of our axes titles. Now we can just change our chart title to something that describes what we're looking at. It doesn't have to be exactly this, but I'm going to say it's a relationship between air temperature and relative humidity over time. Something like this. But did anybody have any questions about how to make any part of this Excel graph? Okay. Well, this is basically the Excel portion that we have to do. And you would use this to answer the last part of the Canvas Word doc, that assignment that you'll have to turn in for Lab 8. Now, if we go back to the PowerPoint, we're going to look at how we can, more specifically on clouds and cloud condensation nuclei. So we just did our weather meter and we made our Excel chart. Now this is a lab walkthrough of what it would look like to make a cloud using cloud condensation nuclei. So I'll just play that for you all now.
Hi, this is going to be a demonstration walkthrough of the cloud in a beaker portion of the weather lab. So first things first, you can see here that we have our hot plate / stir plate set up. We have a dry 600 milliliter beaker, and we have our magnetic stir bar sitting inside of it already. That would be this guy. So before we turn on the heat, we'll add a couple of drops of water. And we're going to cover our system to make it into a closed system. And this is just using a little bit of aluminum foil. Okay. Go ahead and turn our stir bar on. So it should be spinning at about 600 revolutions per minute. And we'll also turn the heat on to about 100 degrees Celsius. Now, what the stir bar does is it circulates the air, and the heat will eventually evaporate the water and bring water moisture into the air. So conditions inside of our beaker should take about 10 minutes or so to stabilize. And in the meantime, one of the things we're going to want to be aware of is how the conditions inside of this beaker should change. So we won't sit through the whole 10 minutes, but I will pause here and there and bring us back in to take a look at how the conditions have changed over time. And actually, even now we can see the beaker clouding up a little bit. So let's zoom in and see if we can take a look at that. Yeah, where the beaker was clear before, we now see a little bit of cloudiness film forming, and that's the condensation from the water vapor right alongside the inside of the beaker. very interesting thing to be aware of is, just get this to focus, is right here we see a line. The condensation is not formed here, but it is forming right here. It may not be quite as visible on camera, but I can see it quite clearly, and hopefully it'll become a little more distinct as our experiment rolls on.
So it's easier to see the line of condensation if we were to look at the markings on the side of the beaker, so where the numbers are. So this line that's moving up is where relative humidity is at 100%, and it's moving up and continues, and that's our dew point. That's our dew point. Yeah, I think most of it's going to be sped up over time, but this is just a closed beaker of, say, like a fake atmosphere for just a setup for us making clouds.
Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes or so, and the conditions inside of our beaker look like they're about stable, meaning that we don't quite see the condensation line rising very rapidly. As I lower my finger down the side of the beaker, this upper portion is relatively cool to the touch, but as I get lower and lower, there is a lot more heat. It's a lot warmer closer to the bottom of the beaker, and that makes sense as the bottom of the beaker is close to the hot plate. So as far as conditions inside of our beaker go, we see that it is cloudy or is full of condensation near the top, and is clearer, meaning there's a lot less condensation near the bottom. Closer to the top, we have a cooler section, and at the bottom, we have a warmer section. Now, moving on to the next part of our experiment, we're going to go ahead and open up our system to add just about 50 milliliters of water to our beaker. So here, we pour out approximately 50 milliliters, and add that to our setup. Now I'm resealing our beaker, and what I'm going to do is put a little bit of ice on top of it. So just as we saw from the first part of our experiment, we had a temperature gradient, a temperature differential, warmer zone near the bottom and a cool zone near the top. We're going to replicate and actually emphasize that same thing here. And this mostly is for the sake of making it go a little bit faster. So we definitely have that warm spot near the hot plate. And here with our ice, we force a cooler spot, a much colder spot in our beaker near the top. Now we're going to give this about 5 or so minutes to stabilize again, and after we do that, we'll go on to the last part of our cloud in a beaker experiment.
So by adding water in our tumbler and adding more ice to the top of our closed system, it's like we're trying to mimic what it would look like, say, if we were over any water body, like a warm ocean, and we have our atmosphere and a cooler zone at the top of here. So that's just to force this process to go a lot faster and to mimic what it would look like in real life a little better. Now we'll just time lapse until Darren comes back in.
All right, so it's been about 5 minutes, and let's take a look at our beaker. Conditions inside should have stabilized. So we see a lot of condensation on the outside, or rather the inside of the walls of our beaker. And that makes sense as we have a lot more water, a lot more moisture inside of our system now. So, if I were to peel up our aluminum foil just to take a look at the conditions inside of the beaker, everything looks clear. Despite there being some condensation on the walls, it looks pretty clear inside. Now the next thing we're going to do is light a match. We're going to let it burn for a little bit, and then we're going to toss it inside of our beaker. Seal it up for a little while, and look at that. You can see a little cloud funnel tornado thing starting to appear. Now, let's pop this open. Now you can see wisps of cloud coming right out. Now, if we're to let this go for, a while, right, minutes on end, then this would still occur. All of this condensation, all of this cloud will still pour out of the beaker. Now, in comparison, if we were to take another match, light it, let it burn, but then blow it out, there's smoke coming off of it. And in a few seconds, the smoke stops. So, one of the questions that we'll be asking in our lab is, what is it that's coming out of the beaker? Is it smoke? Is it condensation? Is it something else? And why? So, there we have it. That is going to be a walkthrough of the cloud in a beaker portion of the weather lab.
So that was how we could make cloud in a beaker in like a lab setup, and looking at specifically what smoke or what a match could provide to help make a cloud. So now, these are the deliverables, but let me go to the Canvas page so we can go over the Word doc that you're going to be filling in. So if we have, now that we're in lab page 8, if I go back into the lab 8 assignment and questions, we have our table 1, which we gathered Weather Underground stationed these different parameter data using the W Underground website. For question 1, you're for each of these parameters, you're just going to write maybe 2 or 3 sentences on why the station that we collected together, that data would be different from wherever your second station is. And you could explain, you could use the Google Maps terrain feature to help you with that. And because a lot of different things can affect your wind direction, wind velocity, air temperature, relative humidity, and dew point temperature. If your weather station, if your weather meter is in the middle of a field versus in between 2 buildings, or if there's no wind at all because of just where your station is, these are so many different things can change all of these parameters, if it's close to the ocean, if it's more inland, things like that. So 2 to 3 sentences for each of these parameters. And if we scroll down for question 2, this is referring to that video that we just saw about the lab setup of making a cloud in a beaker, where describe the conditions of your beaker after 1 drop of water evaporated and conditions stabilized. So this is immediately after, but before we added in our ice, when we put in those 2-3 drops of water and our water stabilized with our stir bar, what do you see inside of our beaker? For question 3, you don't have to answer because you didn't get to feel it yourself. But question 3 is, as you lower your fingers down the side of the beaker, explain how the temperature changes. So if we have our beaker and our hot plate at the bottom, if after conditions stabilize, if we lower our finger down the beaker, it's going to get warmer as we get closer to the hot plate, which makes sense to us. But if we think about this in terms of air temperature as it warms up and relative humidity, so the beaker at the bottom of our beaker where air is warmer, we see that it's clear. And as you go up, that's when there's condensation, and near the top, it's where it's cool. So relative humidity near the warmer zone at the bottom is going to be a lot lower because the air temperature there is, it's going to be higher. So the warmer air at the bottom, relative humidity is lower. The cooler air at the top of your beaker, relative humidity is going to be, it's going to be the opposite effect. So question 4, what is the point called where water starts to condense in the beaker wall? So when we saw that line as it starts to move, that's the dew point. You can just, write that. Question 5, describe what you observe when you look at the atmosphere inside the beaker before adding a burning match. So that point when Darren, he lit the match, you can describe what it looked like before then. And for question 6, answer what it looked like after the match was added. Question 7, what did the burning match provide to the atmosphere of the beaker that produced the change you observed? So at the very end of the video, when we saw our beaker with all the wisps coming out, and that was maybe half a minute or so after our match was added in, and these little wisps of our cloud did start coming out, but then he lit that match and blew it out, and the smoke went away after a couple of seconds. So if we know that a match, after a couple of seconds, the smoke's going to go away, do you think that what we have in our beaker is that all of the little particles coming out. Is it smoke? What is it? What did the match add to our system to create what we have at the end? And that's what you can answer for question 7. Question 8 was talking about the Excel graph that we made together. You're going to upload your Excel spreadsheet as a separate file and describe the relationship between air temperature and relative humidity as it over time. Is it how does it align with each other? How does air temperature affect relative humidity? And B, explain why this relationship occurs. So this is your Word doc for Lab 8 that you have to turn in. This isn't due until the next time we meet for lab, so in 2 weeks. Did anybody have any questions about any part of this? Okay, so let me go back to my PowerPoint. Deliverables, okay, there's something in the chat. What SS station did you use? It's the station closest to, sorry, let me escape. It's the station closest to USF. So if we go back to, yeah, okay, so I closed the W Underground like lab, or I closed the W Underground link or that separate web page, but you don't have to write what that station name is. For this first one, since we went over it together, I know which station this is. It's just for the second column, you would just write your whatever station ID here, so I know what other station you're looking at. Okay. Cool. So at the end of this, you're going to upload your responses to the Lab 8 datasheet and your Excel sheet with your one Excel graph with the double y-axis of temperature and humidity over time. Again, we don't have lab next week because it's the semester check-in. If you have any late work that you want to turn in, or if you have any questions about your grade, you can ask me you can ask me whenever, but like this next week, you can also just like catch up and talk to me about that, and we can discuss what we can do if you're not super happy with your grade. So our next meeting is the week of April 27th in 2 weeks. And as a heads up, there's no pre-lab quiz for that lab 2, for lab 9. But that is basically the end of lab. And if we don't have any other questions, thank you, and I hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
So I actually had one question.
Sure.
Just in regards to, what is it?